And Debbie, I'll hand it off to you.
Thank you, Vincent. And I don't have a slide, so we don't need to have this slide presented. Good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Debbie Gorman. I'm the president and CEO of Greenlining. I'd like to really start by thanking Dr. Shirley Weber and the 9-member task force for your work and commitment to taking action to study, to develop the reparation proposals for Black families, with special consideration for the descendants of the enslaved, and a real advocate of the Gold Chains project at UCLA and how that's integrated with the work that you all are doing. And again, Greenlining is very appreciative of the task force, you also have a recommendation of ways to educate the California public about the task force finding. Our work at Greenlining, we also find that there is a tremendous amount of misinformation and disinformation about Black families and the Black racial wealth gap. So that part of your task is well regarded, and we hope to support you in any way we can. A little bit about Greenlining. We've been doing this work for about 3 decades now. We were founded in 1993, so next year we will be celebrating 30 years of doing work that is the praxis of economic and economic equity along with racial equity, which really centers a lot of Black families and the impacts that we have felt over the decades. We have been learning from our missteps, and we've been reiterating and iterating our approaches with a deep dive into our communities of practice. So we try to be proximate as much as we can, and we listen to the community to tell us what it is that we can do to change policies and to remove discrimination and redlining. As Vincent Lay has presented, this pillar of our work on technology and tech equity actually has that thread through all of those things that represent wealth and closing the wealth gap. He started with housing, went to unemployment, talked about health, jobs, and pricing. And this is tough and ongoing, tedious work. And we found that the tech equity or disequity for the Black community is represented in governance, in access to power, in allocating and redistributing resources to communities. And those are all going to be key to how, this reparation and the ability to put proposals forward is successful or not. And Greenlining, just to give a perspective on how we look at closing the wealth gap, we use wealth as defined by the U.S. Federal Reserve and as measured, right, by federal agencies to be the differences between the assets and the liabilities. And so the asset side of which, we usually think is home ownership, because, there are really 4 real basic ways that we all sort of generate our wealth and how we spend our income, right? So you're going to have your home mortgage or rent, you're going to buy food, you're going to have transportation, and you're going to pay energy for your energy, water, utilities, all of that. And lastly, healthcare. So of those 4 things, there's only one way that you can actually invest in yourself, and that's in home ownership or how you pay your rent. Otherwise, which is grounded in land. Otherwise, that land ownership, you're paying your rent to somebody else. So if we're looking at sort of the assets and liabilities, then the difference is being your wealth. That gap for Black wealth versus the asset side and looking at the discrimination of home ownership and any sort of income contribution, and the liabilities, the debt side. Well, guess what? Technology is the new frontier. I think you've heard from both Vincent and our previous speaker, is the new frontier for redlining. We're taking the data as our artifacts of political, economic, and racial and social racism, and we're taking that data and we're now building these algorithms that create output. So we need to have this perspective and sort of the analysis on these artifacts that we don't perpetuate redlining. Otherwise, this reparation work we'll be doing it in 10 years again. Right? So if we're closing the gap for Black communities, but we don't address technology and how it's perpetuating the redlining, we're going to be addressing that same reparations again. So I hope you see by what Vincent has presented and what we are presented that the data and how the algorithms work is what's key. That the data disaggregated when we first got COVID, COVID hit our shores in 2019, it was for everybody. But we took that data and we disaggregated it, and we realized that Black communities and Latin communities were disproportionately impacted. Right? That the data then helped us understand how we were going to solve the solution, and that it was landing on our Black communities different, and the impact was felt much wider and deeper. Right? That even though the Latinx community had larger cases, the Black community was dying more, disproportionately dying more. So data becomes so key, right? Just in that small example. And so what we've also learned that data now or technology is also a tool to leverage wealth, and that wealth currently exercises its power through politics, and that through the politics protects the wealth. Right, so there's that triangle: wealth, politics, power. Protect my wealth, politics, power. It's a cycle that we witnessed through Citizens United, voters' rights suppression. And so who sits at the top of that wealth cycle? If we're looking at wealth and the creation of wealth today, we see that the top mega cap companies, right? So now we're just really talking about capitalism and how Black folks are deprived from that capitalism. That the top mega cap meaning that the company is over $1 trillion capitalization, are tech companies. Apple, number one, Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook, Google, Alphabet, right? And that wealth seeks power, that power through politics that protects the wealth. So you've got tech companies now defining the way, right? When Amazon says we're going to go to $15 minimum wage, they don't need a federal law, they don't need a state law, right? Amazon of itself, $1 trillion company, is going to say we're going to raise minimum wage. And Black folks are doing a lot of that warehouse work, driving a lot of those trucks in our communities. So the technology part exists both in the data and how it's used, and also on the capital that it's building in our society, and in California in particular. Because if you look at those top five, and actually the sixth one is Tesla, Apple, California, Microsoft, Washington, Amazon, Washington, Facebook, California, Google, California, Tesla, California. Okay, so these tech companies will either perpetuate this landscape of discrimination and the wealth gap, as Vincent has presented, or reshape it. So both sides of it, I would hope that the Reparation Task Force consider how are we looking at the technology from both the capital perspective and from the data and the algorithms that are so biased against Black folks. So we at Greenlining would argue that the work that needs to be done will have to be done over if there's not a future proactive instead of a reactive look. Right? We want to be sure to say, how do we redress the impact so that our wealth, we can begin to close the wealth gap. I was literally at a meeting with the U.S. Treasury and their chief of staff, and we were talking, and they were saying, well, you know, it's such a big problem that we're just going to try to make everything equitable. I said, no, you just need to work on closing that wealth gap. You just need to take that $1 that white families have and the 8 cents and move that 8 cents to 20 cents. Can you move that 20 cents to 50 cents? And we will be making progress. And I'm talking to the U.S. Treasury, right? And then we were talking to the EPA, and then we were talking to the Department of Transportation to say, work on closing that wealth gap. Well, if y'all do the good work of reparation and closing that wealth gap, we don't want to be sitting here having not put forward proposals that also said, look, technology, this is what they're doing in terms of perpetuating that gap. That reparation solutions will not close the gap if we're continually allowing technology to widen the gap. So we see our praxis as the intersection between that economic equity, racial equity, and building wealth. And the third component, though, is actually the climate equity, that there is environmental racism happening as well. So where we live is also been denied resources. Our water is dirtier, our land is dirtier, and our air is dirtier, right? That as you begin to see like billions of dollars being allocated towards climate equity. The Justice 40 initiative is like 40% of those dollars must go to communities of color. And I guarantee you, of that 40%, Black communities represent a larger, disproportionate larger part of those allocation of dollars. So resources are coming, but without a thoughtful racial lens, we will not be able to close this racial wealth gap. So with that, I will close because I'm looking at our time here, and we're available for future questions or any sort of input that you would like from Greenlining. So thank you very much for giving Vincent and I an opportunity to represent to you on the technology front.